Welcome to Back to Heart. I'm your host, Cierra Dae. Today, I wanted to talk about emotional intelligence. This is the first official podcast episode other than the introduction. So, I really wanted to create like a foundational base for future podcast episodes. And one of these foundational bases is emotional intelligence, because I think a lot of what we need in order to move forward and to heal and to connect deeper is to gain more awareness on what emotional intelligence is and how to improve it. Um, a lot of the skills that I have in my life are from working with children and from being curious about my experience and their experience and how they come together and how I affect the how I'm affecting their development and growth and response to life. And because of this, I've gained a big jump in emotional intelligence because I got firsthand experience with when emotions develop in the human psyche and in the human body, because I have most of my experience in working with newborns up until the age of 4. And so this toddler experience, this baby and toddler experience, this developmental leap in the early years of life has taught me so much around what emotions are and how we can work with them and how we can respect them and allow them space to come through. In my early years of nannying, I've been a nanny for 9 years and I started when I was 15. So in my early years, I had a really hard time nannying. I had a really hard time. I knew like children. I've grown up around children. My family and my mom didn't always have children like babies running around, but she was always so kind and open to having people in our homes, and she would take people in whenever they needed it. So we've had a few people living in our home who had young children, who had babies and toddlers. So I grew up around children, but I was young and naive, and I was still very selfish in my early years of life, especially at like 15 when I'm developing a sense of self. So I didn't really take into consideration the children and how I was affecting them and seeing them from their perspective and just having more of an open way of thinking, a curious way of thinking. So it was really challenging to be with children in those early years of raising children, which is why I have so much empathy for like first time parents who have never been around children because it can be really challenging when we're going through it for the first time or even the fourth time if you have a few children. Like, it is a really challenging experience. I've worked with, I want to say dozens, but I feel like it's gone past that. I don't know how many children I've worked with. And I still have days where I question what I've done and how I've responded and how, like, if what I'm doing is the best way to go about it. And I'm grateful for that questioning of myself because it allows me to grow and improve every single day, because I'm not going to get it right all the time. But in this learning and in this growth, there has been so much development in my own emotional intelligence and learning about the human emotions. And it wasn't just through observing and watching the children. It was through gaining information and gaining more knowledge on the psyche of the human mind, development of the human mind in the body, while simultaneously putting spiritual and mindfulness practices into my life. Um, and I'll talk more about mindfulness and how to do that in one of the next few episodes, because I believe that's another foundational approach to growing and opening the heart. But um, let's talk about emotional intelligence. What is it? So, there are 4 different components to emotional intelligence. And I'm going to list them off here and then we'll go deeper into each of these. So, first of all, what is emotional intelligence? Before we get into the components, what is emotional intelligence? What is it? How do we do it? So, the way that I would define emotional intelligence is our understanding and connection to emotions and how they react in our bodies, and then how we respond to those emotions. This, with people who have like a lower emotional intelligence, I'm not a huge fan of like emotional and like the word intelligence in connection with this. Maybe I'll make a new framework for this and use it in future episodes. But to me, when I'm saying like emotional intelligence and saying if somebody has a low emotional intelligence, there can be a lot of shame or resistance to that for people feeling like if you feel like you have a low emotional intelligence, there can be a lot of resistance to it because in a way it may be perceived and felt that someone is describing you as stupid or not smart because of the association with intelligence. One of the like one of the ways that we would counterreact intelligence is to say that you are stupid or not smart. So that is not at all what I'm saying. If I'm saying that you have a if you don't have a high level of emotional intelligence, what I'm saying is that you don't have a lot of experience and understanding in these different things, and that is okay. The purpose of this episode and this podcast is to help you and to give you some of these tools so that you can help to improve it and to help move forward. One of the biggest components is keeping a curious mind. One of my close friends, Ben Fritz, talked about this a lot on his podcast and in his life and in our personal conversations. We've talked a lot about how important curiosity is in order to have a satisfying life and a life of growth. So that is generally what emotional intelligence is. So the 4 different components of emotional intelligence, I'm going to list through them. So the first one is perceiving emotions. So this is reading our body language and the facial expressions and being able to see what's happening in the physical realm when we're experiencing an emotion. Number 2 is reasoning with the emotions. So using the emotions to get curious about our experience and why exactly this emotion is coming up, where exactly it's coming from. Number 3 is understanding the emotion. So this is knowing that emotions can have a wide variety of causes and you're not super stuck on like one thing, and just having a wider perspective. And the last one is managing emotions, which is the one that everyone wants to jump into when we're learning about emotions, when we're learning about parenting. This is learning how to regulate our emotions and respond appropriately. This is the one that everybody wants to jump to, but it's the hardest one because it is typically a very uh, just a very habitual response that we have to our life and to our emotions. And so coming out of it takes a lot of practice, and it takes all of these, the 3 components before as like prerequisites in order to get to this place so that we can create more space in between the emotion from like identification from emotion. So let's go back a little bit. We'll go through each of these and talk about them. So the first one is perceiving emotions. So this is, like I said, reading the body language and the facial expression. So it's getting more of like an observer view of what is going on. You're identifying these different things that are happening in your body. If you've been to therapy before, which I have, I've been in therapy for a year, and I've been into therapy consistently over the past 3 years, on and off, but consistently for the past year. Highly recommend therapy. I think it's beneficial even if you feel like you don't need it. I think therapy helps us to unravel. It's kind of like exercise. Like it's a great way to continue with our brain health and our mental health. So highly recommend. But if you've been to therapy before, a lot of therapists will ask you how you're feeling, maybe what emotion you're having, and you'll say like, "Oh, I'm feeling like anxious today," or "I'm feeling sad," or maybe you're feeling angry. And I remember the first time my therapist asked me this question, she was like, "Oh, how does that feel in your body?" And I remember one of the first times she asked me that, it was very, very hard to one, know what she meant, and two, to name it. Um, when she asked me how emotions felt in my body, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm just feeling anxious. Like, there's a feeling of anxious. There's a feeling of anxiety here. And with practice, like at first I felt like I was kind of like bullshitting at it a little bit. Like I felt like I wasn't truly identifying like what these feelings were in my body. I'm like, I don't know. I feel like something in my chest. Like I feel things in my body. Um, but with time and with like continuing to name those things with each session, and also within my own personal introspection and meditations, I was able to like put more trust in myself and what I was feeling in my body, and to put more description to what I was feeling in my body. And um you can describe these different emotions in your body with texture, with weight, with size. Like, feeling is such a unique thing that we all have as a species, such a beautiful thing that we have as humans. And we're able to really describe it because of language. Like, we're able to describe it in beautiful ways if we learn how to like develop the tools and the language to describe them. For example, anxiety. Anxiety is a really, really common feeling that a lot of people have in our society now, just because, I mean, not just because, like, there's many different reasons for it, but one of the biggest reasons is that we are a very fast society. We are so much faster than we need to be. And this is due to a lot of different things that I won't go into in this episode. But because of this, we feel a lot of anxiety, and anxiety for a lot of different people is felt in different ways. For me, when I experience anxiety, typically I feel like a weight on my chest, like a pressing on my chest, and it's hard for me to breathe. So it's really hard for me to take a really full, deep inhale into my chest, and exhale. Sometimes it feels like there's a lump, like a ball in my chest, and doesn't feel like a perfect circular ball. It feels kind of lumpy. If I put a color to it, it would typically be like a dark, mushy gray color. Like darker in the middle, a little lighter on the outsides. It depends on the day. Sometimes it's like darker on the outsides. So these identifications, they might sound really silly to you if this isn't something that you've done before, and you're like, why do you see a dark, mushy ball in your chest? It's really weird, Sarah. Um, so this is a few different reasons. Like, one, like the feeling, like naming, like it feels heavy on my chest. It's hard to breathe. That helps us to bring us into our body and out of our minds. Um, and then the dark, mushy ball, like the visual component of it, for me can be very helpful because of the visual component of it. So like it puts something into the mind to connect to the body in order for me to like process and work with. Like, okay, there's this dark mushy ball. How can I help this dark mushy ball? What can I do? Like, what kind of care can I give to it to get it to a place, like to help get it to a place that I would like it to be at? Like, for me, openness would look like kind of a translucent glowing orb. And in my chest area, that is, I like to associate things in like the form as chakras. So that is like the area of the heart chakra. And so I would see it with like this green or yellow, like this green and yellow glowing orb. And associating that, like seeing that visual of like, okay, my anxiety, there's something closing in me, there's this dark ball. How can I get it into this more open, expansive, translucent ball where things feel, yeah, just more open and more light? Um, And then that gives me something to work with, instead of just like sitting with it. Like, I feel anxiety, I feel anxiety, I feel anxiety, I am anxious, I am anxious, I am anxious, and just hyper identified with this anxiety. and not being able to really do anything with it or be able to sit with it. Um, okay, let's move into the second one because I could go on for a very long time. Body connection and perceiving emotions. Well, actually, I do want to talk about facial expressions too, because emotional intelligence isn't just about our own emotions and being able to identify and connect with our own emotions. It's also being able to identify and understand other people's emotions. This is where a lot of people can fall short, and it can be especially for people who like have personality disorders like narcissism and things like that. Typically won't be listening to this podcast, but if you are, I am so proud of you. Because it can be really hard. But facial expressions is a really big part of facial expressions and body cues is a really big part of reading other people's emotions, and being able to like use our emotional intelligence to see where they're at in their emotional experience and emotional field. So, working with children, again, has taught me so much about this, especially with toddlers. You have to learn how to read very subtle cues. And like a lot of people think that I'm a child whisperer because of this, but it's really just learning those cues, the emotional and physical cues that children are always giving us in order to give them what they're needing or help them or support them in a way that is like truly beneficial for them. So there's like various like the simple ways to practice these are getting like a feelings chart and looking at like ones that has physical pictures, like pictures of people's faces, and identifying the emotions. I do this with children, young children. I'm working with a 5-year-old right now. Um, and we're working on emotional intelligence. And I have a poster board that I created for him in a calming corner, that has all of these pictures of these people's faces. I purchased them from Etsy. I didn't make the poster. I ordered the poster and then I went and got it laminated. Um, so I can post these in the link description if you're interested as a parent. But you have all of these pictures of faces, and each of them have different emotions. And some of them are very subtle, like there's an anger one and then there's a grumpy one. And these two feelings can feel different in our body. And it's so fun to work with a 5-year-old on this because sometimes he'll say, like, I'm feeling grumpy. And I'm like, oh, are you feeling angry? He's like, no, I'm just feeling grumpy. I'm like, oh, I love that you can associate the difference between the two, because there is a difference. And, they can be very subtle, but it's usually the intensity of them, or the reasoning for them. Like dropping your papers on the floor might make you grumpy, but like being told that you weren't accepted for a job can make you angry. So um, there's so many different ways that these emotions can be identified, but having these like charts with the facial expressions can be really helpful for the beginnings of these things. There's some that have like very simple faces, like happy, sad, mad, and then there's some that have like more extensive of like frustration, anger, anxiety, worry, and all of these different things. There's also a feelings wheel that I recommend for putting language. This is more for like more developed ages, from like 6 onward. So like being able to read essentially. Um, a feelings wheel can give you like just more language to these different feelings. So within happy, you can have so many different feelings. There's gratitude, there's joy, there's ecstatic, like feeling ecstatic. There's so many different little like subsections of happiness that we can feel. Because sometimes I just feel happy and I don't really feel joyful. Like those two things feel very, very different to me. Sometimes I feel grateful, but I don't really feel joyful. So having these different languages improves our emotional intelligence, because we're able to understand ourselves more, and we're also able to communicate to other people more efficiently, and this helps with communication. This is why emotional intelligence is really, really important in relationships, because it improves our communication and therefore improves our relationships, because a lot of people can talk. You can talk all day every day, but there's not a deep level of communication that allows for that deep level of connection that so many of us are craving. So being able to read other people's body language is very important, as well as the facial expressions. Um, Body language is different person to person. Like there are body language and facial expressions is different person to person, but there are obviously like things that can be very similar. Like if they're sad or they're angry, they're going to have a scowl. They're going to be maybe teary-eyed. Like those are signifiers for these specific emotions. But there's also like an energetic component if you watch the body language as well. Like if there's a closing, if you've been with a partner for a long time, maybe you understand this too. Like you can feel when your partner closes off when they're feeling sad. And maybe they're not frowning, maybe they're not crying, but there's something that's happening in their body language that's telling you that they're feeling a certain way. Helping to improve emotional intelligence with children and helping to improve awareness of other people's emotions with children's. There's a tool and a skill and conscious discipline that I use with children to help to improve empathy, because children don't really develop empathy until the age of like between 5 and 6, and not fully to like beyond that. But developing the empathy is really important. Like it's our job as adults to help them to develop empathy. So one of the ways and tools to do this is if, like, say for example, there is a child, they take the ball from the other child, and the child who initially had the ball was very sad about this, so they started crying. You see this confrontation. Our job as adults is to go in and to help to support them through this, because this is a challenge, this is a dilemma that they don't know how to deal with yet. So you go up to them, and they might be telling you some stuff, but one of the first things that I would say is, we should put names to this. We'll say the first child who had the ball was Sarah. The second child who had the ball was Angelica, who took the ball. Angelica took the ball. Sarah had the ball. Angelica took the ball from Sarah. So I go up, I come down to their level, I look at them both, and first I turn to Angelica and I say, Angelica, see her face? Her face is doing this. This shows us that she's feeling sad. So this helps to give them empathy for, like, firstly, it gives them clarity of like, oh, like I'm looking at this other person. I can see this other person. Like it's not just me. I'm not the only one who exists in this world. We all come out as these selfish little beings. It is what it is. Like we come out. That's why sharing is really hard for children, because everything is ours. Everything is mine. Why do I have to share? Why do I have to give to other people? So we all come out selfish little beings. And so we're teaching these social skills amidst each other. And so this gives Angelica a chance, one, to look at her friend's face, and two, to identify that with an emotion of, oh, Angelica is feeling sad. And you could also add on to that, Angelica is feeling sad because you took the ball from her hands, and so she feels sad. And so that gives them language, and it also helps Sarah to identify, oh, I'm feeling sad right now because this happened. And it gives an opportunity for those children to learn at individual levels and learn in social levels. This can be done in relationships as well, of romantic relationships. As adults, you can look at your partner's face and they come home from work, and you can look at them and you could say, honey, your face is going like this, like you have a furrowed brow, or you're frowning. How are you feeling? Or are you feeling sad? Like that tells me that you might be feeling sad. Not making any assumptions, because we don't really know what a person is feeling. Only that person can tell us how they're feeling, but it can help to open up that conversation and that discussion, and to also to help them to recognize like what's going on in their body, and in their physical experience. Okay, let's move on. I get stuck in talking, so apologies if this is a long episode. Number 2 is reasoning with emotions. So this is using the emotions to get curious about the experience and why this emotion is coming up. So I kind of briefly talked about that when in the Sarah and Angelica experience with the ball. So now that we have this identification, now that we have these feelings in our body that we can kind of put names to, maybe put some pictures to, and have some language for, now we can get curious around like why this is coming up. it can be very easy to blame, like put this into external circumstances. Like, oh, this made me feel this way. Like this is because of this other person. Like they made me feel this way. And I think it's really important to note that through emotional intelligence, like it's very important to take personal accountability. Not that like the other people shouldn't have accountability, like if they're being assholes, if they're being unkind. It's not that they shouldn't have accountability for their actions or for what they're doing. What I'm saying is that it's very important for us to know that we hold the power of our emotions and our feelings, and we are the ones that get to work with them and hold them, because we give our power away when we are making it out to be other people's problems. Of, you made me feel sad, what are you going to do to fix it? You made me feel angry, what are you going to do to fix it? Versus, I feel angry because you did this, I feel angry because you cheated on me. Like, that emotion is very valid. I feel angry because you cheated on me. How am I going to, obviously the other person may have some responsibility and they need to take actions if you are wanting to work on that or whatever, but how are you going to work with your anger? How are you going to give love for your anger? How are you going to express this anger for yourself? So now that we have that side note out of the way, using the emotions to get curious about our experience and why this emotion is coming up. So anxiety, going back to anxiety, because this is, again, a very big one. A lot of people are like, I don't know why I'm feeling anxious. And I personally experienced this. Um, I have experienced this. It hasn't been very like consistent in the recent times, but in the past, I have had anxiety that would come up. Like, I would wake up with anxiety, like just this weight on my chest, and I'd be like, "Oh my God, why am I feeling anxious?" And typically, what happens is, like, first of all, I didn't give myself actual time to like sit with the feeling and be with that feeling, to be able to like get curious about it. Sometimes we don't know where these emotions, these feelings are coming from. Sometimes it's hormonal, sometimes if you have a menstrual period, a menstrual cycle, you may have like hormones that come up that create just feelings in your body. Maybe you just start to feel sad and you just need to cry, or maybe you're feeling a little irritated and you need to express it in a way that's healthy. Um, and we don't have to have a why behind it, but sometimes there is a why, and it's important to get curious about it. And a lot of the times there is some type of underlying thing with anxiety, of something being out of alignment with our life, that is causing the anxiety. So then we can get curious about that when we have the identification with it. They can be big things, like, I don't like my job, I am not happy in my marriage, I don't feel connected to my children. They can be big things that are causing anxiety, or they can be little things of like a job interview, or feeling like you've been at home too much, or feeling like you don't have, I mean, this feels like more of a big thing of like feeling like you aren't connected to people, like friends, like you don't have any true friends. And um underneath that can be little things too, of like, oh, I need somebody to talk to. There's all these feelings inside of me, and so then they're like accumulating, and now I have all this anxiety because I haven't been able to express them and let them out. So there can be big whys, there can be little whys, and all of them are important and should be given space for. I'm not going to talk too extensively today on taking action in order to unravel things like anxiety and unraveling karma and things like that. But that will be a future episode that I do want to touch on, because um, with anxiety, with like insistent anxiety, there's usually things that are out of alignment in our life that we really need to look at and do something with, that we need to take action on. So that will be a future episode. For now, we will just stick to the present feeling and emotion, what we're feeling, and not trying to fix it or solve it, or take action at this moment in time, and just being with it. So the third component of emotional intelligence is understanding emotions. So knowing that emotions have a wide variety of causes. So we have so many, we have so many different emotions, but we also have so many different things that happen in our life that create a response in our body. Everything creates an emotional response in our body. whether it's like more of a neutral response of feeling like calm or satisfied, or more of a quote unquote like tumultuous response, like where there's more energy moving in our body, there's more reaction in our body. Like maybe we feel like a gut response of like, oh, like jealousy or fear, or sadness, where we just feel choked up in our throat or our chest. So all of these different things, like there can be so many things in life that can create all of these emotional responses. Um, and it may not just be one thing. Like I was saying before, like with anxiety, it may not just be one key factor of like, oh, this is why I feel sad. It can be many different things. And we don't always have to know the why. We don't always have to know exactly what it is, but being curious about it, not for the sake of like solving it or um, unearthing the answer, but to be able to just like understand ourselves more and understand our emotional experience more, understand how people talking to us makes us feel, how our actions make us feel, how the world responds to us makes us feel, and then being able to use this to improve our emotional intelligence and improve our interactions and relationships in the world. The last one, the one we've all been waiting for, the one that everybody wants to get to, is number 4, managing emotions. So the reason why this is last is because you have to know what these emotions are, how they are feeling in your body, giving true space for them that comes from respect and honoring, so that when you get to the space of managing emotion, it's not coming from a place of suppression, which so many people in our society and in our families and things like this are experiencing and go through. They experience a lot of suppression because we are told as children that we are being loud, that like I can't tell you how many times I've heard this phrase, that's enough, when children are crying. Like, that's enough. You've cried enough. It's enough. Because our emotional body is like, oh, like I'm exhausted. I'm tired. Like, totally valid. Children crying for 30 plus minutes can be exhausting. It can be very exhausting. But for us to decide when their emotional experience is an expression is done is not the responsibility of us. So that in turn, with years of that suppression or forcing of suppression, creates an actual suppression at the individual level where we don't feel like we're allowed to cry, and that our crying is annoying, that our crying is too much, and that we need to stop it. So this isn't regulation. This is not healthy interaction with our emotions. And neither is a loose expression of emotions where we're just reacting to our emotions. So usually this is coming from anger. Like if you see like a lot of people who have been angry and they just react to life and they just yell and scream and throw a tantrum and get in a really, really unconsciously expressioned place. This also is not a real management or healthy expression of emotions, because you're not regulating the emotion and then responding to it. You're just reacting from it. You're like, oh, I feel all of this. Let me let it all out. There's a time and a place for that. Sometimes that needs to happen, but most of the time that doesn't allow for us to connect to ourselves and connect to other people. And it pushes ourselves away. It pushes us deeper into a hole of disconnect, and it pushes other people away. So learning how to regulate our emotions, we'll talk a lot. This is probably going to be a lot of conversations and a lot of podcast episodes in the future, because I have a lot of friends who have different skills and skill sets and tools, to be able to offer these different ways of regulating, because there's so many different ways, and I teach children so many different ways, and it can be a really fun process to find out what ways work best for you and help you. But I'll briefly like talk about some of the skills for children and for adults that can help. and how to respond. So I think it's really important for myself, like, if I'm feeling a really, really, really big, deep emotion, I just need to feel it first. I need to, like, ride the wave of that emotion before I bring it like, if it's an interaction with somebody else where we're trying to solve something, I need to feel that emotion and I need to let it be with me first before I try to solve that problem or I try to have that conversation with that person. Because otherwise, the conversation isn't productive in the way that I want it to be. Like, it doesn't help in the way that I really truly want it to help. And it doesn't really bring us together because I'm just coming from a very triggered, like emotionally triggered place. So, a way to like to regulate emotions, there's different ways, like I said, to help to bring us back into body and to give us ourselves the tools. So, I think like there's two ways to go about this. Like there's expression and there's regulation. Um, Sometimes we just really need to express the emotion. Sometimes it's really big in our bodies and it needs a place to go. It needs a place to come out. So you can do this through exercise. I like to box, you can jump rope, you can run, you can go on a walk, something that gets you sweating and gets your heartbeat going a little bit. Um, like sometimes you just need that space. You can also scream into a pillow. You can I like to do with my clients, I call it something different every time. Today, I'm going to call it shaky hands, but a shaking of the body because our body is just like, I feel this vibration in my body when I feel a need to get something out or a need to express something. And so, like, shaking my hands, I start by shaking my hands and then I move throughout my whole body. So I start by shaking my hands and then I start shaking my arms and then I start shaking my head and then I'll start shaking my upper body and then my hips and my lower body. I start shaking out my legs and then my feet. And then I just start shaking my whole body at once. And I just like, it looks ridiculous. It feels kind of ridiculous. But afterwards, like every single time, all the clients that I've done this with have felt so good and have felt more of a place of homeostasis instead of all of this energy just being trapped in the body. So that is a really good tool for expression. Um, there's also, so if you have to express, go express. You can also like journal about what emotion you're having in a way that is unrestricted. Um, for example, like going, if you have like a bad day with your boss, you can create a journal entry on a piece of paper that is maybe not in your journal. Just create a piece of paper, grab a piece of paper, write out everything that you're feeling, all of the words in your head, all of the thoughts, all of the expressions that were going to come out to either a friend or an acquaintance or to the boss that may not have been productive or helpful, writing it all out and then tearing it up and throwing it away. So that way it has a place to go and you can get it all out, but you're not creating these tearings within relationship and you're able to come into the challenge or the interaction in a way that is productive and helpful. Because you can still express these emotions. Like you can be angry at your boss, you can be angry at your spouse, and do it in a way that's productive and helpful, and also can communicate really well. So, like, instead of going in with your spouse and throwing things at them and telling them that they're a fucking idiot or that they're stupid, and all of these things that kind of belittle our partner and makes them feel small, and in turn, like, tries to make us feel big, but it makes us feel smaller too. After you get all of this expression out, then you can come in and you can talk to them. You can have communication and not just talking. You can say, I feel really angry right now because you said this, and the way that felt to me was this. And then you can place boundaries after that. You can say, I don't want you to speak to me like this. And if you need to tell me something, you can say it like this. But I'm not going to allow you to speak to me like this. So this expression, if you have like speaking on like more of an astrological standpoint, if you have a lot of fire in your chart, or if you just feel, if you're not into astrology, if you just feel a lot of fire in in your personality. If you're very outspoken, if you're like not afraid to speak up, if you're not afraid to do or say something, that can be really, really helpful in relationships because you're usually the one that brings the problems to the surface. You're usually the ones to talk about things, to like clear the air, but it can also bring a lot of challenges because it can create a lot of turmoil when it's done in an unconscious way and the fire is just flaring out and burning everything, and it's just kind of like a wildfire instead of this really maintained bonfire that's big and beautiful, and tended to. So now that we have that expression, you can learn how to respond appropriately. Responding appropriately looks so many different ways. There's no perfect way to respond, and oftentimes we'll get it wrong. Like we may make mistakes and we may say like something may just come out, we're triggered and we may call our partner stupid and it'll come out and it may cause some hurt and some pain. We're also able to create bridges. We're able to create some type of bonding afterwards to be able to help us to bridge what we had broken. If it was like something like that where we call our partner stupid, apologizing and coming back and being able to admit to your faults and take ownership and do something different in the future can be really important. And it can, we have that opportunity because we're imperfect humans. We have the opportunity to make mistakes and to also to change in our future and change our future choices and actions. So that is the four components of emotional intelligence and a general overview of what it is and how to improve upon it. This is a process, just like with any other type of knowledge and goal. Like it takes time to study these things, to study ourselves, to study other people, to learn about emotions and learn about how to respond to them, learn about how to communicate, learn about language. And every single day you're going to improve. Every single day you're going to grow if you're committed to this journey and if you're committed to yourself and to your relationships. I really hope that this podcast episode was helpful for you and that you received something from it. If you did, please feel free to send me a message on Instagram or on Facebook. You can find that information and how to contact me in the show notes, including my email. If you would like to see a future episode talking about something specifically and have any specific questions, feel free to email or message me and I'll make an episode about it. Stay tuned for future episodes on going deeper into some of these things that we talked about today on mindfulness and different regulation tools. Until then, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming back to heart.